Um, Well, thank you guys all so much for being here. Welcome to our training session. So this one is going to be about grant prospecting, how you can uncover funding opportunities for your organization. Um, so first, Angela, do you want to actually say a bit about the Tacoma Capacity Building Project, and then I'll jump back in?
Sure. So this is a great day to be part of the Tacoma Capacity Building Project. I'm excited to share that grants and grant prospecting and finding money is one of our most requested topics. And the purpose of this program is to support nonprofits within the city, especially those that are newer or under-resourced or BIPOC-led organizations. Also, we are working with Tacoma Creates and Tacoma Arts to support a select number of cultural organizations who focus on art, youth, community, history, etc. So we love to be working with them. And thank you to the City of Tacoma for investing in this project. And we're excited to be bringing this to you along with other series that we'll be having this summer. So welcome, everyone.
So today we're gonna think about searching for grants as sleuthing. So this is our fun analogy for the day of grant sleuthing being like a treasure hunt, with the prize being finding some money for your organization at the end. So let's put on our best detective eyes and think about finding grants through that lens. So first, I'll go over a little bit about what we're going to talk about in today's presentation. So it is divided into three sections, all with our theme of treasure hunting. So our first section is going to be treasure maps, which is where you actually go to research grant opportunities. I know a few of you mentioned that is a sticking point, so we'll definitely be going over that. Our second part will be decoding the clues. So that is talking about eligibility criteria and requirements. And then third section will be X marks the spot. So tips for how you can successfully identify grants. So I'm hoping that with these three parts of the presentation, we should be able to touch on a lot of the concerns that you all brought up today. And we're also going to have some time at the end for questions. So feel free to, ask whatever questions you have. And there will also be a few other interactive parts throughout the presentation as well. So your treasure map. So as Angela has mentioned in the beginning, sometimes Google may be, Google's generally the first place we go whenever we have any questions, right? And so it's easy just to type into Google and see what you can come up with. Unfortunately, Google is really not the best tool to use to search for grants because, there just is such a high volume of search results that you're going to get, and they are unlikely to really be super tailored to what you're looking for in particular. So what we would really advise is to use a grant search tool because they are specifically made for this. And so they can really help you find the best opportunities for your organization. And the good news is, even though you do typically have to pay for these subscriptions, there are a variety of different ones that can fit all different budgets. So hopefully these give you some good ideas, and there are others that exist out there, but these are the most common ones and the ones that we are familiar with using here that I wanted to bring forward. So I'll just mention these. So the first one, probably the highest budget option, is a search tool called Instrumental. And I've pulled these prices from the web, so these can vary. Sometimes these will have sales or be a different price from one month to the other. There could be fluctuations, so don't these prices aren't necessarily set in stone. But Instrumental is around $160 a month. It does have some nice features. So if you do have a larger organization, or if you feel that you need more tracking with your grants, this particular tool can track the whole grant application process. So you can put tasks in there, you can set deadlines, you can collaborate. You can also easily view 990 reports from funders, which is pretty neat. So you can see exactly how much money they've given away in the past, how many organizations that's gone to. So it can help give you a lot of information to decide if a grant is good for you to pursue or not. But that is the higher budget option. So let's move down a bit. So for mid budget, there is an option called Grant Station. I did see recently they had a sale where access was only $179 a year. They say it could be $700 a year regularly, so I'm not sure how often that sale is. But if you check back for that, that's a pretty reasonable price. And also, if you are a member of the Grant Professionals Association, you can get that access for free. So each of these databases is going to have slightly different grant options in them. But in general, a Grant Station, for example, will pull government opportunities as well as from foundations, et cetera. So there's also the foundation directory online, which is a monthly fee. This one is interesting because it includes a lot of small foundations that maybe don't have a formal application process. So, you might just find that there's a funder in your area and you would just send them a letter of interest, with just a basic letter kind of format. And so that tool is good for finding those sorts of opportunities. For a lower budget option, Grant Watch is about $200 a year, which is on the lower side of things. It also includes federal funding, and there are some other grant writing resources that are built in that you can access with that to maybe help you with the process. So these are the options that we have used and have had success with finding grants through that we would like to bring to your attention. There are also some other treasure maps that are available. So there are some free treasure maps that are not Google. So one option would be to search government databases. If depending on what your organization is and what kinds of grants you're looking for, if you are looking for government grants, there is a website called grants.gov. It is tricky to navigate, but if you are looking for federal or those sorts of grants, you could find them there. More likely to be useful for you is likely the Washington Department of Commerce. So the Department of Commerce, you may know, they do a lot of different grants across all different categories and topics and needs, and they always have their list of grants available on their website, so that's free to check out. So I would definitely encourage that. You can also go directly to the websites of different foundations. So, you may know some funders that are local to Washington, perhaps the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or different foundations like that. You can always go straight to their website and just see what they have available if you don't have the resources to pay for one of the paid grant searches tool. Also in Washington State, a lot of the tribes are a good resource for smaller grants. We'll sometimes also do more general operating expenses. So again, if you know what tribe or tribes are in your area, you can just go straight to their website, or I might suggest typing in the name of the tribe and then grants, so you can easily navigate to there. So these are ways that you can search for free, but they're a bit more targeted, than just a general Google search. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next section of decoding the clues. So looking at eligibility criteria. All right, so clue number one is going to be your basic eligibility requirements. So it's super important, as you're going through the grants, as some of you mentioned in that last slide, it does take a lot of narrowing down, and a lot of times, it is a time-consuming process to look for grants, but hopefully by looking at some of these, thinking about some of these things that you can look for, might help make the process go a little bit faster. So the first thing that I would really advise you to look at is to look at the basic eligibility requirements. So when you're looking at a grant, to make the process go faster, I would advise, don't read through the entire thing first. You want to kind of train your brain to look for certain things first to see whether or not you are eligible. So some grants may require you to have a nonprofit status. If you're fiscally sponsored, grants may not work for you. They may only be eligible for 501c3s. They may be restricted to a specific geographic area. Maybe it's just King County, but you're in Pierce County, or maybe serving a particular population. So usually when you are investigating a grant, there will be a section of eligibility requirements. So this is where I would recommend you go first. First thing, before you look at anything else, is just look and see, is my organization eligible? And so the second clue that I would look at, as someone also mentioned earlier in the comments, is aligning your priorities is super important. So you really want to make sure that the project that you're proposing aligns with the priorities of the grant maker. So, a grant might be, maybe it has some sort of vague title like healthy communities, and you think that your project might fit into that. But then you look into it and maybe your project is focused on youth, but this funder really only wants to fund things that are geared for adults, and maybe it's more health focused. So that's really important too, is to really drill down into that and see whether or not your priorities align. And it also might be that you could use the funding for one particular arm or part of your organization. One particular project would fit, but not your overall organization. So then you could tailor and say, hey, this project I have aligns with youth, and so we could talk about that. So here's a couple of other clues that I'm going to share. So another thing you want to look at is financial requirements when you're determining whether or not a grant would be a good fit for you to apply for. So are there any financial prerequisites? Someone has mentioned this. So matching funds basically means that the funder is going to require you to provide some money as well. So it could be a percentage. If they're giving you, they might say it's a 20%. So you have to provide 20% of whatever they give you. Sometimes that match has to be in cash. Other times it could be in kind, which would be, potentially hours of staff time or something like that that could be used. So that's a big one to look for and to know what your organization has the capacity to do. Also, you might want to check and see if a funder is going to require an audit. Sometimes funders will require that your organization have had an audit in order to apply, and that is definitely a barrier for a lot of organizations because audits are tricky and expensive. So that's a good thing to look at. Another clue you can look at is analyze past funded projects. So this is a way to, make sure that your project matches up with what the funder wants. So sometimes on a funder's website, they'll have a list of projects they've funded in the past. And so you could look to see if organizations similar to yours have received money. So that can be a helpful clue as well when you're deciding if a grant is a good fit for your organization. All right, we've got two final clues here. So evaluating the timelines and deadlines. So this one is important. So, you might find a grant that sounds great and you're like, oh, everything, checks off so far, but then you realize that the deadline is in 4 days. And so, sometimes that might be doable and sometimes it might not. So you want to make sure that you look at that deadline and see how much work is required and whether or not you have the capacity to get that done in the specified time frame. And then also you want to look at the grant maker's time frame. So sometimes grants will be different terms. As someone mentioned in the comments, There aren't as many multi-year grants. I would say that what I see most commonly is a 1-year grant period. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 grant year periods. Sometimes they can also be extended. You could get a grant for 1 year and then there might be an option to extend. But make sure that you look at that timeline, how much time will you have to use that money from the grant, and make sure that aligns with your project. Finally, you want to make sure to verify that you have all the required documents. So you can look for a checklist of things that you need to upload with your grant application. This might be things like annual reports, financial statements, board rosters, IRS determination letter. And these are all pretty typical things that I would suggest, as you do more grants for your organization, keeping yourself organized, keeping a folder or a file, or however your organization keeps track of things. Keep all of these documents in one place so that it's easy to see what you have, and make sure you have the required things. And it'll also make putting a lot of applications in easier if you have all this stuff in one place. So now X marks the spot. We're going to give you guys some tips for successfully identifying grants. So my number one tip is to set up alerts in grant search engines. So whichever search tool you end up using, whether it's GrantWatch, Instrumental, anything like that, or another one that we didn't talk about, there is typically a way to set up email alerts or subscribe to a mailing list. Also, subscribing to mailing list is really helpful for those of you who are looking for grants with the Department of Commerce, City of Seattle, City of Tacoma, any of the different cities or government orgs. They typically have a mailing list, so that way you can just get an email in your inbox when they have new grant opportunities. And with the databases, if you do Instrumental or GrantWatch or GrantStation, you can select your areas of interest that your organization is working in, and then you can get grants, a digest of grants emailed to you that are related to that. And so that can help save you time as well, just to get those in your inbox, and then you've already got some options to go through. So another thing I would encourage you to do would be to keep a calendar of grant deadlines. So as we've touched on a little bit, grants are always really time sensitive. There are deadlines and dates. Sometimes there are multiple deadlines. There might be a pre-application or a letter of interest due first, and then after that, the full grant application might be due. So again, I think a lot of successful grant writing is just staying organized. So, something like Instrumental, if you have access to that, can help you with organizing those tasks. But you can also do this however works for you, a spreadsheet, a calendar, whatever your organization uses. Another thing to keep in mind too is that sometimes you are going to find grants that seem really well aligned, but you look at that deadline and you realize that it's really too close for comfort. So I would encourage you to have a way to keep track of those grants. Maybe it's a spreadsheet, and you just type in the name of the grant and then make yourself a little note and note down the date that it will be open again, because a lot of grants do recur annually, especially from a lot of the philanthropic foundations, local foundations, things like that. They're going to do the same grants every year and usually the same application cycle. So that's another way to save yourself time. You might find a grant this year and then you're like, oh, darn it, can't apply till next year, but that's okay because that means you already have a grant that you can apply for next year. So save yourself time. Don't make yourself search twice. Keep yourself a list of grants that come up as you find them. So another tip I would give is to diversify your funding sources and where you're looking for funding. So, there's varieties of sources. You could look for grants from government agencies, foundations, as we mentioned, maybe corporations. And that, reduces your reliance on a single funder or funding type. And then just reiterating what I said earlier of, not being afraid to explore multiple grant databases or looking in multiple places. So, even if you're using GrantStation or Grant Watch, also go to the Washington Department of Commerce, also go to the City of Seattle website. I think that your best success is going to come when you aren't relying on just looking in one place, but you're looking in multiple places because, as some of you have mentioned, one database has a certain type of funder, but not another. And so, yeah, just branching out and looking at as much as you can, I think is really beneficial. So those are all of the formal slides that we have to share. So thank you all so much for your time.